All right, welcome everybody. Continuing with the Hilchot De'ot. There's only three halachot in this chapter. Where's the screen that I was sharing? How do I get back to? All right, do you guys see the Chabad on the screen here?
Yeah,
All right. Anyone want to read the first one?
sure. Uh, I'm just gonna read off your screen though.
Okay, yeah.
A person might say, since envy, desire, the pursuit of honor, and the like are a wrong path and the drive, excuse me, and drive a person from the world. Quote, end quote, sorry. I shall separate from them of a very great degree and move away from them to the opposite extreme. For example, he will not eat meat, nor drink wine, nor marry, nor live in a pleasant home, nor wear fine clothing, but rather wear sackcloth and coarse wool and the like, just as the pagan priests do. This too is a bad path, and it is forbidden to walk upon it. Whoever follows this path is called a sinner, as implied by Numbers 6:11, statement concerning the Nazarite, and quote, he, the priest, shall make an atonement for him for his having sinned because of the dead, quote, because of the dead, end quote. Our sages declared, if the Nazarite, who abstained only from wine, requires atonement, how much more so does one who abstains from everything? Therefore, our sages directed man to abstain only from those things which the Torah denies him, and not to forbid himself permitted things by vows and oaths and abstention. Thus, our sages stated, are those are are not those things which the Torah has prohibited sufficient for you that you must forbid additional things to yourself?
Oh, thank you. Um, okay, so only a couple of commentaries in here. I shall separate from them to a great degree and move away from them to the opposite extreme. It's referring to asceticism here, which I really didn't even know what asceticism was. I had to look up the definition. It's like withholding things from yourself for religious purposes. So in Shmone Parakim, he makes a similar but more lengthy condemnation of asceticism. There, he also mentions other ascetic practices like refraining from sleep and seeking solitude in the mountains and deserts. How many times do you hear people talking about these practices? Well, for Shavuot, we stay up all night long and we study. And, there's, according to Rambam's view, there's harmful things associated with that. You don't have to torture yourself to say, well, I'm the frumest of the frum. Look at me. I can deny myself this and that. That's not the way to be according to Rambam. So he explains that at certain times, many of the pious adopted ascetic practices as a safeguard against excessive involvement in materialism. However, they never regarded such practices as a goal in their own right. Others observed their behavior and mistook asceticism for an end rather than a means to achieve the middle path. So if you're addicted to spending and buying things you don't need, and you're a hoarder, you know, then maybe you should abstain from, having material things. But that's to correct an incorrect behavior. Not an ideal way to live is to, withhold everything from yourself. From his statements, it would appear that there are two drawbacks to asceticism. One, it might lead a person to poor health, illness, and a lack of strength, which would prevent him from wanting to serve God, as the Rambam states in Halakha 3. So you shouldn't be starving yourself as a way to avoid, getting enjoyment. Like he's comparing it to like the monks. They would like put ashes on their food so they don't get any enjoyment out of the food they're eating. That's who he's comparing it to. And secondly, a person might err and feel that he has fulfilled his obligation to serve God through these ascetic practices, which is not what God is asking of us. As a result, he may never feel the need to dedicate himself to the service of God the way God prescribed it in the Torah. There's a third disadvantage that is stressed heavily by the teachings that I do not follow, by the teachings of the Kabbalah, Hasidut, and may be hinted at by Rambam's statements. No, Rambam's statements were his statements. They were not pointing to Kabbalah. Kabbalists later come in and say, oh, look at what Rambam said. This is what he means. And then they try and insert that into their Kabbalistic works. So they take his statement to say it's pointing to something that they find in the Zohar, which I also don't care about, which states that God created the world in order to let himself be known. Similarly, Tanya, which I also care nothing about, if it happens to repeat what Rambam says, we're good on Rambam for having it there for them to come along later and plagiarize. But Tanya in chapter 33 explains that God created the world because he desired to have a dwelling place in the lower worlds. Thus, a person who tends to other worldliness and asceticism defeats God's purpose in creation. So we can get what God's purpose was just from the Peshat, just from reading the Torah. But if later optional mystical works come along that find value and what Rambam is pointing out, that's fine too. In the Shmoneh Parakim, Rambam also criticizes excessive fasting. He quotes, I mean, sometimes it's halakhically required, like Tish B'Av and whatnot, but to carry it beyond what's required, that's what he's criticizing. He quotes the prophet Zechariah, who questions the motives of the Jews' fasts. Was it for me that you fasted? And exhorts them to practice true justice and show kindness and mercy to every man and his brother as the proper service of God. To underscore this point, he concludes with the prophecy that even the public fasts will ultimately be transformed into festivals of days and rejoicing. So the fasts are supposed to be a temporary situation. In the ideal state, the messianic era, we won't be having things like Tish B'Av, where people are fasting. And the purpose of the fast, anyway, is not to deny yourself food; it's for inner reflection, to afflict yourself and to self-reflect. So the phrase "to mortify himself," um, where's that one coming from? To mortify himself by fasting. The phrase "to mortify himself" is significant here because to Rambam and Hilchot De'ot 1:4 through 1:9 himself mentions that the sages commanded both the community and the individual to fast in times of distress. The Rambam statements here have been questioned by the Rashba in a responsa and by the Lechem Mishnah based on Nederim, laws of vows. However, the commentaries note that Shmuel, the author of the statement in Tanait, also states in Baba Kama that one may fast. Here, the Rambam statements are directed against self-mortification and asceticism, not against fasting per se. Nevertheless, it must be noted that in Hilchot Teshuvah, when the Rambam describes the paths of Teshuvah, chapter 3, halacha 4, he makes no mention of fasting. So let's skip over to that real quick, since that was mentioned. Hilchot Teshuvah, chapter 3, halacha 4. Even though the sounding of the shofar on Rosh Hashanah is a decree, it contains an illusion. It is as if the shofar's call is saying, "Wake up, you sleepy ones, from your sleep, and you who slumber, arise, inspect your deeds." Remember, I was saying it's the purpose of fasting is to self-reflect. That's it, to inspect your deeds, repent, remember your Creator. The actual meaning of teshuvah is to return to the path that the Creator gave us in Torah. Those who forget the truth in the vanities of time and throughout the entire year devote their energies to vanity and emptiness, which will not befit or benefit or save. Look to your souls, improve your ways and your deeds, and let every one of you abandon his evil path and thoughts. Accordingly, throughout the entire year, interesting, we were before the recording, we were just having a conversation about this. It's amazing how we didn't know that conversation was going to come up, but it fits so perfectly. And accordingly, throughout the entire year, a person should always look at himself as equally balanced between merit and sin, and the world as equally balanced between merit and sin. If he performs one sin, he tips his balance and that of the entire world to the side of guilt and brings destruction upon himself. On the other hand, if he performs one mitzvah, he tips his balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit and brings deliverance and salvation to himself and others. This is implied by Proverbs 10:25. A righteous man is the foundation of the world, i.e., he who acted righteously tipped the balance of the entire world to merit and saved it. So the point the commentary is making, the point to this halakha and teshuvah, is that fasting is not part of the process. You've heard rabbis say, "Oh, because of this, you need to fast, to do teshuvah for what you did." It's not part of the halakhic process. And also, I find it interesting that last week, I don't know if it was on the recording or not, but we were talking about converts and this concept that the Messianic era can come if every Jew would keep Shabbat for 2 weeks in a row, which we pretty much know is probably not going to happen. But if most of the work has been done, then we just need to do the last little bit to tip the scales. So if we understand with regards to converts, not every convert is going to be 100% frum. But as long as their good deeds outweigh their bad deeds, then they offset. So as long as the bad ones are offset by the good ones, and then you have more good ones left over, we're tipping the scales, which is pretty much what that just described. Not with regards to converts, but with your side of doing mitzvot leading to merit, um, being like a scale that can tip the whole world. So that's the goal, is to be as frum as possible, but understanding that there is a definition of a tzaddik, which is not one who's perfect. Such a Jew doesn't exist. It's one whose good deeds outweigh their bads. All right, so we're actually, I guess I didn't scroll. There was one more thing we didn't read here. This general statement also refers to those who fast constantly. They are not following a good path, for our sages have forbidden a man to mortify himself by fasting. All of the above and their like, as Solomon directed, said, "Don't be overly righteous and do not be overly clever. Why make yourself desolate?" Okay, now we're one third of the way through it because we only have three halachot. Anyone care to read the second one?
You can do it.
Thank you.
A person should direct his heart and the totality of his behavior to one goal, becoming aware of God. Blessed be he. The way he rests, rises, and speaks should all be directed to this end. For example, when involved in business dealings or while working for a wage, he should not think solely of gathering money. Rather, he should do these things so that he will be able to obtain that which the body needs: food, drink, and a home and wife. Similarly, when he eats, drinks, and engages in intimate relations, he should not intend to do these solely for pleasure, to the point where he will eat and drink only that which is sweet to the palate and engages in intimate relations for pleasure. Rather, he should take care to eat and drink only in order to be healthy in body and limb. Therefore, he should not eat all of the palate desires like a dog or a donkey. Rather, he should eat what is beneficial for the body, be bitter, be it bitter or sweet. Conversely, he should not eat what is harmful to the body, even though it is sweet to the palate. For example, a person with a warm constitution should not eat meat or honey, nor drink wine, as Solomon has stated in a parable. The eating of much honey is not good. One should drink and endive juice, even though it is bitter for them. He will He will be eating and drinking for medical reasons only, in order to become healthy and be whole, for a man cannot exist without eating and drinking. Similarly, he should not engage in physical intimacy except to keep his body healthy and to preserve the human race. Therefore, he should not engage in physical intimacy whether he feels desire, but only when he knows that he requires a seminal emission for medical reasons, or in order to preserve the human race.
All right, so we get into some adult conversations here, but we're not going to be too raunchy. We're going to edit those parts out. Okay, so Rambam addresses himself in Shmoneh Parakim to many of the concepts mentioned in this and in the following halakha. He begins that chapter with the declaration: a person must control all of the powers of his soul with his intellect. We have to think with our minds here, which should be in control at all times, and concentrate on a single goal at all times to comprehend God. Blessed be he. To the extent that a man can know him, all of his activities, what he does, the way he rests, and what he says should lead to this goal. One of the nice things about Judaism is it gives you a way throughout everything you do in life, throughout your entire day, to interact with God. Some religions, they don't do that. They're like, once a week, you come in here and we think about it, and the rest of the week, it's like they're completely separated. But we have a way to involve every action throughout the entire day with godliness. So in the previous halakha, the Rambam condemned asceticism and other worldliness. In this halakha, he stresses the desired intent of our worldly involvement to know God. Um, in chapter 1, halakha 6, the Rambam introduced a religious component into development of an ethical personality. That's what this whole section is about: improving your personality and character traits, pointing out that we must imitate God's qualities. In this halakha, he adds a further point: all of man's actions are to be directed to the awareness of God. The concept of knowing God recalls the opening halakha of the Mishnah Torah. The fundamental principle upon which all fundamental principles are based and the pillar of the wisdoms is to know that there is a primary being. In both halachot, Rambam emphasizes the knowledge of God is not an abstract intellectual pastime, but it's not just being able to out debate one of these scientists that's arguing for the Big Bang Theory, but rather it's an all encompassing commitment embracing every aspect of our experience. Torah living does not confine God to the synagogue or the house of study, but provides us with the means to relate to Him within every dimension of our lives. Even those who don't have a synagogue to go to, you can live a completely valid existence. And Mishnah Torah is the book to show you how to do that. Okay, so similarly, when he eats, drinks, and engages in intimate relations, he should not intend to do these things solely for pleasure. In Shmoneh Parakim, the Rambam also uses the expression solely for pleasure, indicating that the Rambam does not advocate a life without physical pleasure. It's part of life. It's what God gave us. But note also from the passage of the Rambam's commentary to the Mishnah, there is nothing wrong with enjoying food, for example, as long as one does so within the framework of maintaining health. Indeed, in Shmoneh Parakim, Rambam emphasizes how one may use pleasure to encourage himself to perform the acts necessary to maintain his health. So you are allowed to do things for pleasure, as long as it's being used in a permissible way and not in an inappropriate way. So, okay, so similarly, he should not engage in physical intimacy except to keep his body health and to preserve the human race. So there, the Ravad, who always finds a way to disagree with Rambam every time he comments, mentions a third reason for physical intimacy: granting one's wife her conjugal rights. Halakhically, this is a reason where a divorce could be granted if the man is not doing that. So the Rambam does not mention that issue here because in these chapters he focuses on those behaviors in which a person engages voluntarily as an expression of his personal desires. He discusses a man's conjugal obligations later in Mishnah Torah in Hilchot De'ot, chapter 14. So he's not ignoring that halakhic obligation that men have to keep their wives happy. He just deals with that in a different section. Here, he's talking about the individual's behaviors for their character and their personality. So that's why he's dealing with preserving the human race and keeping their bodies healthy here in this chapter. In his commentary to the Mishnah, Sanhedrin 7:4, Rambam writes, the intent of physical intimacy is the preservation of the species and not only pleasure. The aspect of pleasure was only introduced in order to arouse the created beings, that's us, towards that ultimate goal. The proof of this is that desire and pleasure cease after ejaculation. For this was the entire goal for which our instincts were aroused. If the goal were for pleasure, satisfaction would continue as long as a man desired. So if you ever wondered why that is, now we know. And as a physician, he did deal with the human body, not just with the religion. All right, one more halachot, one more halacha. We would like to read the last one.
A person who accustoms himself to live by the rules of medicine does not follow a proper path if his sole intention is that his entire body and limbs be healthy and that he have children who will do his work and toil for him. Rather, he should have the intent that his body be whole and strong in order for his inner soul to be upright so that it will be able to know God. For it is impossible to understand and become knowledgeable in the wisdoms when one is starving or sick, or when one of his limbs pains him. Similarly, one should intend to have a son with the hope that perhaps he will be a wise and great man in Israel. Thus, whoever walks in such a path all his days will be serving God constantly, even in the midst of his business dealings, even during physical intimacy, for his intent in all matters is to fulfill his needs so that his body be whole to serve God. Even when he sleeps, if he retires with the intention that his mind and body rest, lest he take ill and be unable to serve God because he is sick, then his sleep is service to the omnipresent, blessed be he. On this matter, our sages have directed and said, Rabbi, move down.
Oh, sorry.
On this matter, our sages have directed and said, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. This is what Shlomo declared in his wisdom. Know him in all your ways, and he will straighten your paths. Proverbs 3:6.
Thank you. So I want to point out this is my own personal commentary here. Similarly, when one should intend to have a son with the hope that perhaps he will be a great and wise man in Israel, this is not referring to a geographical location today. This is not referring to any prime minister that presides over a place that calls himself Israel. For thousands of years, this has been our goal to have sons that we hoped would be great, wise and great people in the nation of Israel no matter where on the planet we were for thousands of years. So, lest anyone think this is referring to current events, this has always been the case with us. Okay, so there's not much commentary on this one that I wanted to point out. The Rambam associates such behavior with Deuteronomy 6:5 as our source text. Love God and the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your might. The course of action described enables us to dedicate every aspect of our being toward the love of God as prescribed in this verse. Rambam elaborates upon this statement as follows. This is a different one. Which statement is he talking about? Oh, and all your deeds should be for the sake of heaven. Our sages included in this entire concept in the most succinct expression possible. When one mediates on this concise statement, one wonders how they could describe in its entirety an idea so awesome that many books were written about it without encompassing it totally. Without a doubt, the statement was made with divine inspiration. Let's see. Okay. The commentaries note that concerning Hillel, all of his deeds were for the sake of heaven, and associates that with the following narrative in Vayikra Rabbah. Hillel bid his students farewell. They asked him where was he going. He told them that he was going to perform a mitzvah. They discovered that he was going to the bathhouse and asked him to explain his previous statements. Explain your statement that you're going to perform a mitzvah. He told them, since the human body is created in the image of God, it is a mitzvah to wash oneself. Avot de Rabbi Natan also associates the above statement with this biblical quote, a small passage upon which all the fundamentals of the Torah depend. Note also Rambam's comments. Likuti Sechot, not sure what that is, notes that the rules of the Torah scholarship would have called for a quotation of biblical verse before the quote from our sages. Well, Hillel didn't quote a verse. He just says it's a mitzvah, and we're created in the image of God. Therefore, it's a mitzvah to wash our bodies. But however, the Rambam chooses this sequence because it reflects a progression in the service of God. All of your deeds should be for the sake of heaven implies that the deeds are not themselves holy, merely that they are directed towards godly intent. Know him in all your ways implies a bond with God can be established within the context of our physical activity itself. This reminds me of tzitzit. The purpose of the tzitzit is that you see them and you're reminded of all the commandments. But the strings themselves don't have anything holy about them. They're just strings. What makes it holy is the intent that you're fulfilling a mitzvah. And the mitzvah is to attach the tzitzit to your garment. That way, you will be reminded of what all of the other commandments that you're supposed to follow. So that's chapter 3. Okay, does this go to 4 next? It does. It goes right into chapter 4. This one didn't take to get too long. So in the physical copy, we have an introduction to chapter 4 that it looks like we don't actually have here, because this just goes from 3 to 4. So 1, 2, 3. This is only about 3 pages, so I'll read you this out of the physical copy. And then I don't know if we'll go on to chapter 4 or not, or if you guys want to continue. It gets into some more graphic things. Maybe if anyone wants to do those themselves, we can decide that after reading this introduction. So the opening lines of this chapter repeat concepts found in the final halakha of the previous chapter and continue the line of thought developed there. In the previous chapter, the Rambam explained the importance, albeit as an intermediary and not an ultimate goal, of keeping to a regimen of diet and behavior that produces physical health. He was a physician. In his time, the medical science was all about digestion and what you eat. I don't think it's so relevant today, although in some ways it kind of is. The health people that want everything to be natural, they're against chemicals and preservatives and all of that. They would probably like the advice that he gave. In this chapter, he provides the guidelines and ground rules for such a program. As he points out in Halachot 20 and 21, this advice is intended for a healthy person who wants to maintain his physical well-being. A sick person must seek a person who wants to maintain a sick person must seek a program that is fitted more closely to his personal condition. Moreover, the guidelines suggested in this chapter are not absolute requirements. In chapters 11 of 12 of Hilchot De'ot and Shimurat Nefesh, laws of murder and preserving life, the Rambam mentions certain foods and actions which both in Talmudic times and in the Rambam's time, presented actual threats to a person's well-being. Are they so relevant today? This is where the whole mixing fish and meat comes in. It's a sakana. They considered it a danger. We know now it's not really a danger. You're not really halakhically prohibited from mixing them, but some people keep that custom out of tradition. But there were things like that in their time. And Rambam in his time didn't follow the medical advice of Chazal, which goes to show that if he was alive today, he wouldn't follow his own medical advice. He would follow the medical advice of today's time, which is why he says, accept truth from whoever seeks it regarding medical advice, science, even if they're from non-Jews, or to accept it. So the Rambam, here the Rambam describes foods which are good and bad, implying that through Torah law, though they would advise one to eat good foods, there is no binding obligation to do so. In Igret Moshe, Choshen Mishpat Responsum, compares the matter to smoking. Though smoking can be harmful to one's health, this is what made me think, is this in the actual Mishnah Torah? They were smoking cigarettes back then? And I realized this is why it's not on the website. This was added from today. So they're comparing this to smoking, which can be harmful to one's health. There are many smokers who remain unaffected despite their regular use of cigarettes. By the same token, the diet and regimen of health suggested by the Rambam is advisable. However, disobeying it will not automatically cause the loss of physical health. Therefore, the Rambam offers this guidance as an integral part of the program for personal growth. He does not make it an absolute requirement. The rationale for the inclusion of this medical advice in the Mishnah Torah, a book of Torah law, can be explained on the basis of the Rambam statements in Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, where he explains that he included the means of predicting the location of the moon in that text, so that everything will be known to the men of understanding, and they will not lack any of the Torah's paths. Hence, they will not need to go search for it in other texts. Rather, they will be able to seek from the book of God and read. None of these shall be missing. Similarly, in regard to these points of medical advice, the Rambam included them in Mishnah Torah so that a person who desires to live a healthy manner will be able to find guidance from a Torah source without having to employ secular texts. So everybody understand why he's including stuff about the moon, even though we know how it works now, just to make sure that it's complete and it has everything. That's why he's including the medical advice that he's giving you in the upcoming chapter, not saying that it's binding for all generations. The actual advice given by the Rambam has provoked much debate among the commentaries and later authorities. There are three major areas of controversy. One, are the suggestions that he gives based on the works of our sages, or were they taken from other medical sources available to him at the time? Two, should this advice be followed at present or not? And three, is there a contradiction between the advice given in this chapter and the halakhic directives mentioned elsewhere in the Mishnah Torah? So, are the suggestions that he gives, the first one, are these suggestions he gives based on the work of our sages, or were they taken from other medical sources available at that time to him? What they say here is that are the suggestions he gives based on the works of our sages, or were they taken from other medical sources? The attempt to find rabbinic sources for the material in this chapter is a venerable one. Examples of such examples can be found in the commentaries of the Migdal Oz and the Avodat Hamelech and the, 4 other books, without meaning to demean the scholastic integrity of these sources. The measure of their success is questionable. Although the Rambam may address the same problems as the sages did, his approach is often radically different, if not opposed to theirs. Even when their approach is similar, the language of the Rambam often cannot be linked to a Talmudic source. Fine, if we have new medical technology that says we don't need to rub the tooth of a fox on our wound, let's take the modern day advice. The Kesef Mishnah, that's what was authored by Yosef Karo to try and find the sources for what Rambam gives us. That states that though the medical advice given by the Talmudic sages may have been appropriate for their time and place, in different eras and lands, and other approaches should be taken. Hence, the Rambam sought and followed other sources. Many other commentaries also suggest that the Rambam, more often than not, relies on his general medical knowledge in this chapter. This approach would seem to be supported by closely parallel passages in Rambam's medical writings, which often cite non-Jewish medical authorities. In this context, it is worthy to note that in Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, laws of the sanctification of the month, the new moon, the Rambam explicitly states that he depended on Greek sources for the information that he conveyed. Since all of these concepts have been substantiated without question, it makes no difference who the author is, regardless of whether the concept was authored by the prophets or by a Gentile. Since the rationale for it has been revealed and proven, we do not rely on the author, but rather on the proofs that have been revealed. Clearly, the Rambam does not hesitate to use information derived by scientific means, even if it is not found in Talmudic sources. Nevertheless, some commentaries have concluded that the placement of this statement in Hilchot Kiddush HaChodesh, which comes far after Hilchot De'ot in the Mishnah Torah, and rather than here, implies that the sources for our halachot are Talmudic in nature. Well, we're not required when it comes to medical advice to stick to what the rabbis did in the Talmudic time. So we just have to remember that when we find that type of advice in Mishnah Torah. Okay, B. Should these points of advice be followed at present or not? The authors of this text are not doctors, and for this reason have no way of evaluating medical value of the advice given. Neither is there unanimity of opinion on this matter among medical authorities. Many contemporary doctors see this advice as sophisticated for the Middle Ages, but irrelevant in the light of contemporary medical knowledge. In contrast, many naturopaths and practitioners of holistic medicine see the Rambam's advice as medically sound. He was advanced for his time. He talks about like the sugar disease. It sounds like he's describing diabetes far before anybody diagnosed diabetes. However, surgeons today, you're going to go with that, not what Rambam was talking about. It's far more advanced today, even though he was very advanced for his time. It appears that the Rambam also followed a holistic approach to medicine, which he did. 90% of his medical advice was diet related. He believed that the body cannot be separated into discrete systems with its own function. Rather, all the systems interact and must be treated as parts of an organic whole. The very structure of the chapter reflects this perspective. Material on diet is interrupted by comments on elimination. Prescriptions on bathing contain directives relevant to intercourse. Thus, we are taught to view health as the product of an integrated program of behavior affecting the body in its totality. In this context, it must also be emphasized that the concept of medical advice for health, the goal set by the Rambam in this chapter, is often ignored by contemporary medicine, which has put far greater emphasis on the treatment of disease. The possibility that the Rambam's directives for health are no longer applicable has also been considered by the rabbis. Though we find his statements quoted almost verbatim by many sources, including texts as late a date as the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, other rabbis explain that the makeup of our bodies has changed and that some of these principles may no longer apply. See the Ramah, Evan Ha'ezer, Megan Abraham, a bunch of other commentaries where this concept is explained in a number of different contexts. I don't think our bodies have changed that much. I think we're humans that eat food And if you're not spraying chemicals on them and you're eating fruits and vegetables and meat that's not being injected with steroids and stuff, I don't think his advice would be very bad. All right, the last one. Is there a contradiction between the advice given in this chapter and the halakhic directives mentioned elsewhere in Mishnah Torah? In a number of places in this chapter, we find both explicit and implied conclusions that do not agree with statements made elsewhere in Mishnah Torah. For example, in Halakha 19, the Rambam states that it is improper to engage in sexual relations on the day before one leaves for a journey. In contrast, in Hilchot De'ot 14:2, he states that one should engage in intercourse to satisfy one's wife before departing. In Halachot 1 and 15, he states that elimination should not be delayed. However, he does not use the term forbidden. So I would say he's giving advice rather than actual halacha on that topic. However, in Hilchot Ma'aklot Asarot, laws of forbidden foods, he does not use this expression. In Halacha 4, he suggests 8 hours of sleep each night, while in Hilchot Talmud Torah, he speaks of optimally spending the night hours in study. There are two basic approaches to this problem. One, the Magen Abraham explains that in this chapter, the Rambam is speaking strictly from the standpoint of health and does not consider other halakhic issues, which is kind of what comes to mind when I hear him discussing, should I have intercourse with my wife the day before I go on a journey? Well, is Nida a factor in this? Once a person knows the proper medical perspective, he should try to adapt his life to these norms to the fullest degree possible. However, on no account should halakha be sacrificed for the sake of general directives on health. B. There are no contradictions between the sets of two directives, and a more detailed analysis of the matter will reveal how the apparent contradictions can be resolved. For example, in regard to intercourse before departing on a journey, the Ramah in Orach Chaim 240 explains that the obligation applies when journeying by coach and the prohibition when journeying on foot. Similarly, in other cases, there is no conflict between the guidelines the Torah sets for our behavior and those that are appropriate for our health. Those interested in a more detailed treatment of the Rambam's medical teachings should consult his scientific writings, in particular his regimen on health and his medical aphorisms, where much of this subject matter is discussed in greater depth. I don't know that I need to do a deep dive on, well, I'm going on a journey out of town. Am I going on by coach or by foot? How does this relate to whether I have relations with my wife the day before? I'm just not going to let it get that involved in my personal life. And I don't think you should either. Don't come to me with those types of questions about the day before you go on a journey. Okay, so I don't know if we'll continue. We've done three series, 3 chapters on Hilchot De'ot. I don't know if we want to continue going through them because it does get personal and graphic. And I don't know if I really want to deal with that on the recording, or if you want to learn that on your own. I guess we'll discuss that and figure out what we want to do next week.